The emergency tone cut every channel. Operator C. Hale's voice moved into the open feed before anyone at the control desk could set a block. Suspicion tightened Hale's jaw as he read a directive he had not authorized, an exclusion header that said the alert was not intended for general viewers. Technicians at adjacent consoles hit keys and cursed, lights on their racks strobing faster than the operator's calm cadence. A live interruption that was not theirs expanded across stations, while Hale's lips kept forming measured, clinical sentences. The conflict was immediate. Stop a broadcast that continued on its own, or allow the unknown header to address whatever it targeted. That was the problem in front of everyone in the dim control room. Hale reached for a metal, lipped coffee mug with one hand and kept the other hovering above the archive terminal. His suspicion pushed him to check the file header before the network propagation finished. He slid the archive catalog open, fingers precise paper, thin print under a fluorescent glare. He had worked the vault for 27 years. He knew the smell of a normal emergency file and the weight of a restricted one. Technician J. Park's sleeves rolled, tapped a console and announced, "The feed's coming from our transmitter, not the network." Hale did not reply at first. His hands were reading the redacted header in the file window. The word exclude flashed in protocol markup, and a second line contained a private recipient token. Hale's breath made no sound anyone could hear. He said, "Lock the output." That was his first active order. Technician Park's fingers flew, locking output now. Park, quick and flat. Park's eyes met Hale's for half a second, and then returned to the failing feed. Park's voice had a hesitancy that Hale felt as a second emotion creeping under suspicion. Doubt. Park moved to sever the digital route and found the control path, already rerotted inside the local transmitter stack. Hale barked a new command. Manual cut at 41 alpha. Go physical. They both moved to the transmitter tower monitors and saw the live frames the feed inserted. A blurred presenter frame, a white dog standing at the edge of screen, a red emblem floating above. The control room's silence broke into urgent clicks, and the mechanical thunk of emergency relays attempting forced shutdown. The feed would not stop. Within minutes, a sheriff's deputy keyed into the incoming alternate audio and overrode the scrape of network operators. Sheriff L. Green's voice filled the room and the broadcast, reporting viewers vanishing from living rooms after watching the interruption. "We lost 4 in Harrowside." Green. They saw the feed and they walked toward the window, and then he stopped, and his throat closed on a fact that made the technicians exchange looks. Hale walked toward what, Sheriff? Green answered, toward the lane. They left their shoes at the door. Their dogs sat and stared at empty air. The deputy's short statements pushed the technical problem into a human danger, and Hale's suspicion shifted into a practical fear. If the feed caused people to move into harm, they had to act now. Field Agent Er. Mendes arrived at the precinct a scant hour later, hair damp from rain, voice low and immediate. Mendes's arrival was an external event that moved the story outward. He had witnesses to question and a pattern of disappearances to connect. Agent Mendes. Hale at the control desk saying a name to pin responsibility. Mendes answered, "Show me the frames." Hale pulled up the interrupted file and scrubbed through static. Faces appeared in quick, horizontal noise, close-ups of living rooms, a white dog at the periphery of each, ritual marks scored near thresholds. Hale's throat tightened when he saw the marks. He reached for a pen and circled an identical pattern across 3 frames with his hand, not trembling but deliberate. That action reflected doubt moving toward resolve. The marks meant intention. Citizen Sarah Bell, brought in from a nearby house with hands folded to hide the trimmer, spoke in short, raw sentences. "I watched it," she said. "My television flashed." Then the woman in the feed said, "Don't." Then she said, "Leave." "My dog didn't move. I told my neighbor and she left anyway." Sarah paused. The voice of a civilian gave shape to the missing people report. "Sheriff Green, where did she go?" Sarah. Sarah shook her head down the lane. She walked like she was answering something outside the house. Hale leaned in. He directed questions about tactile details. What did the neighbor leave behind? What did the dog do? Did anyone knock? Sarah pointed to the dog in the holding room, a small white terrier that sat and watched Hale with eyes wide and still. Hale felt a sharpening. This was no random artifact. He ordered, "Keep civilians away from windows, secure doors." Move everyone to interior rooms. His commands were short, action-driven, a movement from suspicion to controlled fear. Back in the archive vault, Hale and Park worked through metadata for a file that should never have been live. Park read aloud the flagged headers while Hale listened. Private exclusion marker, subject code redacted, geographic containment removed. This was meant for a contained subject, Park, not broadcast. Park's voice rose and fell in a way that exposed a new internal change in them both, uncertainty warred with an imperative to preserve procedure. Hale's hands set a thick manila folder onto the console and he said, "Play the raw." No filters, they watched frames that showed the presenter on a studio set, then a warp where a figure stood in the glazing behind the presenter. A vertical human shape that did not belong to the studio crew. Park reached to pause and fumbled the control. His fingers left smudges on the plastic overlay. That small clumsy gesture revealed tension. Park's fingers were a record of his anxiety. A montage of static, fed evidence filled the broadcast feed as the command room repurposed the live interruption into an investigative sequence. Montaged frames moved across the screen. A hand drawing ritual marks on a threshold, a pair of shoes left neatly by a door, a small white dog sitting and staring at nothing visible in a living room. Citizens watching the feed at home called local precincts and then stopped, answering. The feed did not narrate, it showed. Hale watched the dog image repeat, its head tilt consistent across 3 separate households. He ordered a photographic comparison and Park pulled a split screen. The dog's gaze aligned with a red emblem that appeared in each clip above doorways. Hale, that emblem is not random. Trace its origin. The action forced another external event. Someone in the control room cross-referenced an emblem file and found an old seal used for containment directives 30 years prior. The discovery pushed the team from theory into a factual tie-across incidents. A survivor, Thomas Ellie, arrived with mud on his trousers and a cut on his palm. His eyes did not stop scanning open doorways for the shape of a person who had been there before. Hale placed Thomas at a small table under a single lamp and asked him to repeat what he saw. Thomas described the interruption's presenter's face warping into a figure standing behind the broadcast window, then issuing a private line that matched a name in the studio. "It my sister's name Thomas them. I told them to go. I told them not to watch." Thomas's voice was a raw, physical thing. He kept tapping his cut palm with his thumb, a concrete habit to dispel nerves. Hale's suspicion hardened into an ordered fear. The transmission used names and private tokens. It reached into individual houses and guided people out. Hale's next decision was tactical. They needed to isolate the feed's control point inside their own transmitter tower. Hale, Park, and Agent Mendes mounted a team and drove to the transmitter site through a wet, glassed night. The team motioned in the tower's lobby like a small emergency unit. Park with a toolkit, Mendes with a field radio, Hale with a manila folder and a list of commands. The transmitter interior smelled of heat and sulfur from cooling generators. They moved down a catwalk to the main rack room where the feed appeared to have injected a local rote. As they attempted a manual cutoff, monitors across the room flickered and then displayed a live identification. Someone inside the room had been named by the feed. The image froze on Technician Park for a single second, his face in the monitor with the private exclusion token overlaying his name. Park staggered back and swore. Hale reached for the console and hit the manual power relay. The relay did not respond. Instead, a localized distortion shimmered across the floor near where Park had stood. That mishap was an external event that altered the trajectory. Control failed and the threat manifested physically. The team tried to drag Park away but found the space where he had been was a blank smear of static on the concrete floor. His jacket lay folded and empty, as if someone had stepped through the air and left fabric behind. Mendes shouted, "Park!" and bent to check the jacket pockets for identification. They were empty. Hale moved in and touched the edge of the smear with gloved fingers. His glove came away dotted with a static residue that crackled faintly. The physical sensation, the prick of static at the glove's edge, confirmed the horror was not purely audio-visual. Hale's hands trembled only once before he regained control and barked orders to secure the site. That moment moved the emotional arc. Doubt collapsed into blunt fear. The feed singled out a name live on the main console in the transmitter control room and issued a private exclusion directive addressed to Field Agent R. Mendez. The text scrolled read, "Exclusion R. Mendez, remove." Mendez read it aloud and then shook his head. "This is nonsense," he said. Hale watched Mendez's jaw set. He saw Agent Mendez's decision process speed up in visible increments. "Mendez, we either cut power to everything or we accept this name system and flee the site," Hale answered. "Cut the main." Now they moved together to drop the main breaker, fists on steel, fingers hunting for the safety latch. As the breaker tripped, the room did not go dark. Instead, a localized seam opened where Mendez had stood and the seam swallowed air like a cold mouth closing. Mendez leaned forward and then simply was not there. His radio fell to the floor and emitted one long, flat tone. Hale grabbed the radio and the tone snapped off, leaving only a ring of residual static. After Mendez vanished, Hale forced the breaker back on with a crowbar, breath coming in measured pulls to maintain his voice for reporting. He secured the site and forced a line-by-line log into the archive. The manual entries were physical acts. Writing in block letters, stamping time codes, sliding folders into reinforced cabinets. Sheriff Green arrived with a small team and sealed the entrance to the tower. The facility's official log now read, "Unresolved exclusion event, personnel missing." Officials placed a procedural seal on the feed and the technical artifact was tagged restricted. Yet the live broadcast ripple had already left a wake. Several houses were empty and small white dogs sat by doorways staring down lanes into the night. Hale watched a recorded clip of a woman standing in a threshold, shoes beside her, looking out at the lane. She opened the door and left without turning back. That image created a public shock and another external consequence. Family members gathered at precincts demanding answers. At the precinct, survivors argued heatedly about whether to listen to the archived interruptions or to destroy any recorded copies. Field Agent Mendez's absence was a live pressure point. Some demanded immediate deletion to prevent further vanishings. Others argued for preservation to trace the origin. "We preserve evidence," Hale insisted, voice flat but firm. Sheriff Green snapped, "And what if preserving kills more people?" That argument produced a sequence of short, rapid exchanges. "We study it, we quarantine viewers, we lose the chance to learn, we could destroy the pattern." The back and forth included 3 to 6 rapid lines, and each named speaker's tone was distinct. Green blunt and blunt-edged, Hale procedural and steady, Thomas Ellie frantic and fragmented. The debate revealed a shift from fear toward a grim determination to document the phenomenon, even as they feared the consequences of doing so. While officials argued, clerk in the archive found a hidden header in the footage that changed their understanding. The exclusion token matched a subject number tied to an institutional file from decades prior, a containment event archived under a different name. The clerk announced the cross reference and the room stilled. Hale leaned in, reading the old report aloud. The containment file had been sealed with a precise ritual mark and a list of rules intended to prevent the subject from addressing open audiences. The discovery was a twist specific and concrete that altered the team's view. It meant the transmission might be an internal procedure gone wrong, rather than an outside attack. It shifted the team's priorities toward reconstructing the protocol and understanding how an internal header had propagated publicly. They enacted a partial containment. Officials scrawled temporary exclusion rules across printed logs and taped them to the archive doors. Survivors watched each other and tested compliance with small actions. A neighbor sealed his windows with duct tape, another removed front shoes and placed them in a drawer. Hale read the newly reconstructed directive aloud to the room, lines broken into short, actionable sentences. If the feed names you, do not step outside. If your pet freezes, move them to an interior room. Do not follow individuals who leave on foot following a broadcast. The directives were concrete procedures, not abstract warnings. As they performed these physical steps, an emotion shift occurred in Hale. His initial suspicion became focused determination. Fear refined into methodical action. A mid-chapter mini-cliffhanger arrived when the archived feed played a frame that displayed Hale's own badge number embedded in a private overlay. The control room stopped breathing as Hale watched his badge and name flash across the studio frame seconds before the feed warped open space in the tower. He nothing for a long count and then ordered, Isolate my access. Pull my credentials from the network. Park moved with a visible hesitation and then complied. The scene forced an immediate decision. Hale could remove himself from procedural authority or remain to finish the containment log. He remained. That choice created a ripple. Survivors looked at Hale and waited for his next step. They prepared a procedural seal in the archive, stacking physical barriers and recording forensic entries. Hale wrote out rule fragments on index cards and taped them into the file. A private exclusion header should never be broadcast. Any feed addressed with a subject token must be contained. Do not allow named recipients to exit interior spaces. These were concrete tasks, each an action that shaped the chapter's resolution. At dawn, the facility doors were locked and official chains were attached. Technicians watched monitors for ripple effects while Sheriff Green briefed a municipal panel on immediate safety steps. The public channel received a formal statement. The broadcast was an unauthorized interruption under investigation. The public urged to remain inside. That statement was a controlled, concrete measure to reduce exposure. The final action of the chapter occurred in the archive vault. Hale stood with a sheaf of stamped logs and a reel of damaged tape. He slid the reel into a reinforced bin and sealed it with an embossed seal. Park, gone in body but present in the memory of his jacket, had his name logged as missing. Hale placed Park's last printout into the file and wrote a final procedural note hand-steady. He allowed in a tone recorded on a backup track, file sealed. Exclusion protocol in effect. No public access. He then closed the vault door while Sheriff Green counted personnel, and the feed outside collapsed into abrupt static. The looped tone began and the broadcast dropped into a flat hum. Hale's last recorded act in the chapter was to turn a mechanical lock and place a physical pad across the archive handle. The vault door sealed and the monitored feed reduced to a loop of static and a single red emblem pinned to a dark screen. The emergency tone slammed into Tom Caldwell's living room while he was still rising from the couch, the television switching to a red header that read "Not for Caldwell household" and freezing the image into horizontal noise. Suspicion lodged in his chest and made him fumble for the remote. He slapped every button and the screen remained locked on white type over black static. "Turn it off," Tom allowed, voice rough, and the header ignored him. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number on the screen out of habit, an operator line he had never needed, because suspicion pushed him toward action before he could think. The voice at the other end answered in a clipped tone, then transferred the call. The line clicked and a second voice took over, calm and official, and told him to stay put and describe what he saw. By the time operator C. Hale heard the patched-in call, the archive console was already a ring of humming machines and blinking LEDs. Hale's jaw tightened. He remembered the emergency tone cutting every channel earlier that week, and how his hands had hovered over a directive he had no clearance to authorize. He listened while Tom described the header text. "It names me, Tom," and his words landed like metal on Hale's desk. The emotion root here was suspicion, the same tight feeling that had crept through Hale when the unauthorized exclusion header first scrolled across the national feed. And it governed every decision Hale made in the next 40 minutes. He did not announce fear. He logged actions, requested diagnostics, and demanded verification, because suspicion meant the anomaly could be procedural or weaponized and had to be catalogued. Hale, Technician J. Morales into the intercom from the adjacent bay. "We were seeing an unauthorized private header. It's targeting a specific household identifier." Morales's voice had the short stops of someone trained to compress worry into work. "Patch the call through. Keep him talking. Don't let him unplug things yet." Hale's response was procedural. "Tom Caldwell, state your full name and present location." He the question to generate a timestamp and an anchor. The caller named his address and repeated the on-screen text. The control room recorded it while another monitor displayed a waveform that had no clear origin. Hale moved through the control room with clipped steps. He is 52, slightly stooped, and wears the faded institutional suit he has kept for years. His hands found the analog wristwatch, thumb tracing its bezel while Technician Morales pulled a Coke's trace up on a diagnostic terminal. "Tom, does the header include a symbol?" Hale. Tom answered that a small red emblem hovered above the text, a ring with a white star at its center. Hale nothing aloud. Instead, he keyed a request to signal analyst L. Park and opened a private channel marked Forensics. Park joined within 30 seconds and began scrubbing the capture. L. Park isolated a subcarrier under the main feed that bloomed only when the named viewer's receiver remained active. It responds to being watched. Park plainly. Park's fingers worked fast across the scrubber and spectral display. It isn't bandwidth noise, it's a keyed reactive stream. When that address interacts with the feed, the subcarrier modulates morales, reactive to presence, like a sensor tied to the end point. Hale leaned forward. He forced his breath into even counts and asked the team to trace the modulation back through service nodes. The line of inquiry moved from technician talk to concrete orders. Dispatch a field agent, isolate the house, and cut broadcast metadata. Suspicion shifted into urgency. Field agent R. Klein arrived at Tom Caldwell's house with 2 responders 29 minutes after the initial interruption. Klein carried a handcart with a spectrum analyzer, spare cokes, and a service panel kit. He used his flashlight to read the house number and felt the hair along his neck prick as soon as he crossed the threshold. Inside, the living room smelled of burnt popcorn and motor oil. The television still displayed the red exclusion header, and Tom sat motionless on the couch facing it like a man under a trance. The static screen showed a vertical silhouette of a person in profile. Lines of horizontal noise warped the face. But the silhouette did not match Tom's reflection or any figure in the house. Klein spoke first. Tom Caldwell, this is Agent Klein. We're here to help. He moved toward Tom with only the necessary speed, and another responder reached for the remote to cut power. Tom did not look at them. His jaw was set, his right hand resting on his knee, fingers curled. Klein grabbed Tom's shoulder and tried to pull him back. Tom's muscles did not resist. His body slid as if the couch were the only thing holding him in place. The responders tugged at the power cable and yanked it free with a spark, but the screen's header persisted, as if powered by some other current. They pulled Tom from the couch and set him on the floor. He blinked. His eyes moved in small, measured increments, and he mumbled a piece of speech that made Klein freeze. Do not look away. Not for me, Klein's voice tightened. Tom, listen to me. Morales checked the wristwatch feed. Morales held up a field tablet. The sensor showed a subcarrier spike whenever Tom's pupils tracked the screen. Klein's fingers went behind the television to detach cokes and found paint on the drywall, fresh red, a ring emblem matching what Tom had described. Under the emblem, handwriting had been scratched into the plaster. Klein wiped sweat from his brow and read the letters aloud, slow and precise. Caleb Strong. The name did not belong to anyone in the house. Back at the archive, Hale watched the live feed from Klein's helmet camera, while the control room's monitors flickered with captured waveforms and patient logs. Hale had to manage 2 forms of pressure: the procedural requirement to contain and the personal reaction to seeing a scratched name that pulled at an old file in his memory. He remembered running containment edits the week before and leaving a line in a sealed file that he could not explain. Suspicion shifted inside him into another emotion, a cold awareness that something about the exclusion header chose names. He ordered the team to freeze footage, copy metadata, and mask the homeowner identifier. He also told L. Park to analyze the scratched name Park Cross, reference Caleb Strong, he said. Park returned results faster than Hale expected. Caleb Strong appeared in historical archives, but not as a resident of the Caldwell house. Strong had been a community organizer 20 years prior and vanished from public records after a disputed audit. There are ritualized notes in related scans, Park reported. Red emblems appear in 3 unrelated captures, always near television receivers. Each instance lists a name that wasn't the owner. Morales swore softly. It targets watchers and observers, not just residents. Hale's throat tightened, and he found himself pausing between orders, another emotion shift from suspicion to a creeping dread that compressed his hands into fists. He forced the pause into the structure of commands and instructed Agent Klein to collect the scratched plaster for evidence and photograph the emblem under polarized light. At the house, Klein bagged a shard of plaster with the emblem and the scratched name. He spoke to Tom in short sentences. Tom, can you tell me how long you were watching? Tom answered with 1 line. Since he sang my address, Klein had to press for detail. Who sang? Tom's eyes hardened and he said the name in a voice that twined with fear and recognition. The woman, she stood in the corner and told the name. Klein looked at the TV again and realized an image remained in the snow of the screen. A triangular crease like the edge of a woman's jaw. The responders argued quietly about science versus ritual. The team moved with protocol, but their voices had a threat of panic. Klein radioed in that the exclusion header persisted on battery-powered devices. Hale's channel suddenly filled with an incoming feed that did not belong. It arrived as an audio overlay, faint at first. Then the archive monitors flicked, and a phrase hummed across speakers in a voice processed with the same thin radio filter Hale used in announcements. The voice said, clear and unadorned, "Operator C. Hale, cease transmission." The room went cold because the instruction matched Hale's name. Park isolated the feed and found a direct modulation segment that matched the archive's own control signature, but it contained content not in any active log. The feed's text overlay replaced the containment header and scrolled a new line. "Do not watch, operator." A hand moved to Hale's earpiece. He felt the pressure of the metal there as if it anchored him to duty. Hale's training told him to maintain distance. His body reacted differently. He stepped closer to the speaker, then looked down at his hands and found them shaking. The transmission had just inverted. An exclusion header aimed at his control room rather than a suburban living room. Klein's helmet camera showed the same flicker overlay over the live house feed. The woman in triangle crease image blinked and reassembled into a photograph of Hale, young and wearing a suit he recognized, the same suit with a worn lapel badge. The feed named incidents from Hale's past. An unauthorized edit, an internal memo that had vanished, and a night he had signed a directive without full review. The room's atmosphere turned into a series of cold physical responses. Hale felt the blood drain from his mouth. His jaw worked. He swallowed and his throat made a dry sound. "Operator C. Hale," the transmission said again, and then it listed a date and the initials of a man Hale had once supervised. The control room exchanged short, syllable lines. "Hale, are you receiving this?" Morales. "Yes," Hale answered. His voice was the thin, procedural delivery he used on record the feed. "Capture everything. Park, take an image of the screen. Klein, maintain distance. Morales, cut external metadata routing, but do not sever local comms." Hale's orders were precise, but the team heard an edge. Klein voiced the problem. "The feed identifies people by name when they observe it, not just when they are listed." "Hale, you were being addressed," he added. "We saw the same pattern at Caldwell's. Names that weren't resident names." The back and forth created a pocket of friction. The control room's sterile procedures rubbed against human reactions. The transmission escalated. It began to play images on the archive wall monitors. A clipped video of Hale at a sealed evidence locker, a frame of his hand signing an amendment, a night shot of a colleague whose face the system blurred. The header across those frames read exclusion, do not interact. The content included a sound bite Hale recognized as his own, an offhanded admission from a closed meeting that had been redacted. Hearing it on open air was like smelling metal. He tightened his grip on the console edge. The emotion in the room moved again, from dread to a concentrated anger aimed inward. Hale felt accusation not as a rumor but as an indictment played over the public feed. He knew what containment required. A clean edit, a technical mask, and then silence, but the feed refused to be siloed. When technician Morales reached to cut the archive's external routing physically, the exclusion note persisted through earpieces, through analog wristwatches, and even through Klein's helmet HUD, which was battery-operated. Morales cursed and glanced at Hale. "It's not only broadcast lines," he said, "it's tied to recognition and presence." "Severing cables does nothing." Klein reported outside that a responder near the back door had taken 3 slow steps and then walked into the yard without looking back. The yard's porch lights were off. The responder's body slowed in the footage, and then he moved out into the dark and was gone in under 10 seconds. His radio emitted a static cough and then silence. Hale barked orders, but his voice had a thin quality. Commands were careful, clinical. "Evacuate the immediate team. Secure the perimeter. Do not follow anyone who wanders outside. Do not make eye contact with the image on screen." He felt ridiculous and necessary all at once. Morales argued, "We can't leave Caldwell in that house alone." Hale answered, "We can't let them turn into watchers for the feed." "Pull back." The argument contained 3 short lines and then action. Klein himself pulled back the remaining responders from the threshold and dragged Tom by the shoulder toward the street. As they moved Tom outside, Hale did something he had not planned. He started a recording and began to edit the containment file live. His hands were steady now. Suspicion had shifted into decision. He sliced the feed, removed metadata tags, and embedded an exclusion directive that would warn future operators away from the file. A locked header that read private header, do not distribute. He stripped timestamps and identifiers, then wrote a short procedural note in a voice with the precise flat cadence of an official operator. If you were not the intended recipient, disengage, do not watch. Log and report through secure channels. He read the sentence aloud as he recorded it, making his tone measured so that the words would play cleanly even through degraded speakers. But as Hale closed the edit, the transmission flickered and a new overlay appeared, naming him as it had named Caldwell and listing one detail he had not expected. The scratched name behind the television, Caleb Strong, appeared next to his own file, linked by dates that traced back to an obscure audit. The feed played a document Hale had seen once in a locked portfolio. A complaint about a community outreach program where funding had been diverted and a name annexed to a ledger. The room's air seemed to press against his lungs in a way that manifested only as quickened breath and a tightening at the base of his neck. He did not speak that thought. He translated it into a command to L. Park. "Cross, check the ledger links. Now," Park answered. "There is a connection." Caleb Strong's signature appears on a transfer list. It rotates through a dead PO box registered to a non-profit Hale interacted with. The emblem appears on 3 captures tied to that group. The facts rearranged themselves into a motive. Klein's voice came in over the channel, clipped and urgent. "Hale, one responder is gone." He stepped into the dark and did not return. Tom's aware of the woman. He repeats that name. The emblem matches the plaster. There are too many parallels to ignore. Klein's language was concrete. Names, actions, evidence. Hale felt the shift in his chest again, this time into a resigned clarity. He moved from defensive containment to active confession, proofing. If the feed targeted names tied to certain actions, then the only viable procedure was to isolate all connected records and bury potential triggers. He instructed Morales to compile a redaction packet and to prepare a formal amendment admitting the archive's earlier mishandling. "We catalog what we can and annotate what we cannot verify. Hale, we will not propagate the header. We will not let it find a viewer." He spoke short sentences, each an operational step. The team worked with a tight machine rhythm. Morales and Park spoke in short exchanges. Photographs uploaded, the timestamps retained. Only in offline logs they moved with purposeful hands, taking physical actions that matched their speech. The feed refused to obey their edits. Images of Hale's younger face sliced through the archive monitors in a repeating loop. Then a new sentence scrolled across the screen. "Watcher. Reassigned." The control room's atmosphere split into a single, sustained beat of disbelief followed by the low, animal sound of people recalculating risk. It assigns roles. Klein. It tells people to watch. That diagnosis made the team look at one another, and for an instant, human eyes searched for an answer outside the screens. Hale made a decision. He recorded one more message into the sealed file and labeled it with a procedural tag he had never used before: exclusion, internal only. He spoke into the mic and read the instructions slowly, each phrase intended to compress meaning across any degraded channel. "This recording contains containment edits and an exclusion header. If your device displays a private header naming you, disengage now. Walk away from the display. Do not speak the names aloud. Report through secured channels only." He stopped, then added, not as a moralizing aside but as a concrete action note. "If you hear the woman's voice, do not answer." He ended the recording and forced his hand to hit the archive's eject command. The feed cut with a suddenness that felt like the room's lights being switched off. Monitors went dark and a loop of static filled the speakers where the woman's voice had been. The field agent's missing responder remained absent and the civilians were moved to a safe perimeter. Hale Klein to leave one responder with Tom and withdraw the rest. Klein complied and the responders bundled Tom into an agency vehicle. Before they drove away, Tom looked back at the house and said one small, unmistakable thing. "She my name," and scratched another into the wall. Klein nodded and kept his eyes forward. Back at the archive, Hale ran the redaction packet through the internal gate and flagged it with the highest containment code. He then sat for a full minute with his hands flat on the console and listened to the low hum of the server rack. There were several unresolved items. The missing responder, the scratched name that linked to his own past, and the fact that the exclusion directive had learned to sidestep physical severance by moving into earpieces and battery devices. He discovered in the log that the archive's earlier directive, filed by an unknown hand, had included an instruction line in his name, one he had assumed part of standard procedure, but which now read like evidence of complicity. Hale realized he had to make a final, concrete choice: preserve the sealed file so it could not recruit watchers, or expose the record and risk broad propagation. He chose containment, but he also added a note, a short, cryptic line encoded into the file that he knew a future operator would understand as a procedural trap. He recorded it in his flat voice, the one that suppressed emphasis and emotion so the words would travel evenly through distortion. Entry sealed. Do not open without level 5 clearance. If you are not the intended reader, disengage from playback and report immediately to the archive. He included the red emblem in the header and then stripped identifying metadata so that only a direct, authorized pull would reveal its contents. When he saved the file, the console printed a procedural confirmation. Hale breathed shallow and long. There was no ceremony. He pressed his palm to the desk and the skin of his hand felt cold. Minutes later, after the team had filed statements and the perimeter had been cleared, a knock came at Hale's office door. The sound was soft, deliberate. Hale rose and moved to the door with the slow, controlled gait of a man who had rehearsed restraint. He opened a sliver and found no one on the landing. Only a sealed envelope lay beneath the threshold, its flap tucked into itself and the paper scored with a hand that had left a thin arc of red on the corner. Hale's name was written on the front in a hand he did not recognize. He picked up the envelope with a gloved finger and slid a thumbnail under the flap. Inside, there was only a single index card with 3 words typed and one name scratched beneath. Watcher reassigned, Caleb Strong. Hale did not read the card aloud. He placed it into the evidence sleeve. He had just authorized and logged the physical intake. He did not call for reinforcements. Instead, he sat back behind the console and pressed play on his own recorded containment message, listening as his voice warned hypothetical future listeners to disengage. The recording ended in a silence that felt like an instrument being put into its case. Outside, the archive systems hummed and the night remained intact but not quiet. Monitors showed residual noise and an alert queued up with low priority. Hale closed the session and wrote one final line into the sealed file. If you are seeing this and you were not named by the header, close this file and do not view any associated media. He printed the tag and affixed it to the evidence sleeve. Hale's last conscious act before the control room dimmed into a rotating watch schedule was to lock the external port feed and to set the file to loop with the inclusion of a deliberate corruption, a 1-second burst of static time to disrupt recognition algorithms in consumer devices. It was a small, surgical interference intended to frustrate the header's ability to latch onto accidental viewers. Then he leaned back, folded his hands, and felt the H of every decision he had made compress into a single, mechanistic resolve. He had contained what he could and admitted nothing more to the public record than a procedural anomaly. In the Predon Gray, Agent Klein filed his own report about the missing responder and the scratched name. Tom Caldwell was escorted into an intake room where he repeated his account several times without change. The plaster shard with Caleb Strong's name was entered into evidence with a chain of custody. L. Park archived the modulation capture and stored a copy in an air-gapped drive. Technician Morales scrubbed logs and annotated them with the sealed file's hash. Each action was concrete and documented. No paragraph of the archive's public release would be speculative. Yet the unanswered items remained. Who had written names into walls, who had taught the header to name watchers, and why certain names resurfaced in the feed. Hale walked to the server rack one last time before handing over watch. He felt the weight of the envelope in his pocket and set it into a drawer labeled Field Evidence. He tapped the drawer shut and keyed the log to show the intake. Then he sent a short message to his direct superior: containment enacted, sealed file created. Field agent reported loss of one responder. Further action recommended. He hit send, and the notification light blinked out. He turned the office chair and sat facing the dark wall monitor. For a long measured minute, he let his breath even out. The archive's lights cycled and the low-frequency drone returned to its bass tone. The final paragraph of the day's formal record read as follows. An exclusion header targeted a named viewer, responding only when the viewer remained watching. Field intervention removed the watcher but not the header's pattern. Evidence linked a scratched name on the house plaster to archival anomalies connected to Operator C, Hale's previous casework. Hale signed the report with his full name, adding his label badge number. He attached the sealed index card labeled Watcher, reassigned Caleb Strong to the package, and scheduled the file for a Level 5 review that required travel and authorization. He closed the log and walked to the control room window. Outside, the street was empty and a single street lamp threw a cone of sodium light into the wet asphalt. Hale stood for as long as he needed to feel the cold, sensible certainty that he had done what procedure demanded. Then his earpiece ticked with a faint interference, and someone, through static, said his name once more in a voice, so thin he could not be sure it had come from the building, or from the feed he had locked. He did not answer. He took the sealed sleeve and placed it into the archive's secure drop. The door chimed as it closed, and somewhere in the dark, a faint loop of static began to play against the building's skin. He left the console to the team on watch and walked down the hall. The final concrete beat was a sound. A deliberate, soft knock at the main archive door, as though some other operator had come to collect the file. Hale paused, hand on the handle for only a breath, and then opened the door to step outside onto the loading dock where a delivery van idled with its engine off. The driver was not visible. The van's side panel bore the same worn red emblem. Hale understood in that moment that containment had not ended the pattern. It had only made the pattern quieter for now. He stepped back into the archive and closed the door behind him. The control room lights dimmed to the low watch setting. The sealed file remained secured. The missing responder's status was logged as active search. Tom Caldwell was given temporary housing and a monitored device. Klein left a note on his helmet camera. Name everything you see. Do not repeat names aloud. Hale read the note twice. He set his wristwatch and checked the time. Then he pushed the final command on the sealed file lock. He did not look at the monitor as the header closed. The last sound in the archive that morning was the continued sigh of the server rack and a faint loop of static that started and did not wholly stop. The article ends with a practical action. Hale placed the evidence sleeve containing the index card labeled Watcher, reassigned Caleb Strong into the secured evidence locker, turned the key twice, and logged the closure with his name and badge number on the custody sheet.